Hello, my name is Thane and I like to experiment with AI art. And I have upgraded my style experiments to the Midjourney 5.2 version. In this video I have for you 5 word combinations that I have really liked for 5.2 and then investigated what they do when combined with all kinds of different other words. Right away we start with one that will really get your head spinning. Swirling vortexes. Dynamic spiral patterns found in natural phenomena, like whirlpools and tornadoes. And Midjourney 5.2 really gives us exactly that, lots of dynamic spiral patterns in various colors. They look kind of abstract, but really beautiful and flowy. For 5.2 I have actually changed my preferred ratio a bit, let me know what you think. So here we have the usual landscape that is really swirly. I do feel like this is very reminiscent of the works of Van Gogh, especially the one in the lower left. But it is just such a famous painting that sometimes it's kind of unavoidable. So at least for landscapes you get something very close to Van Gogh without specifying the artist's name. Wildlife does not have the same look though. But it does have some nice looking images with swirls around them. Possibly a little bit too maximalistic in some images, but definitely looks different to me. Now we will look at flower. Something that I haven't prompted in combination with styles previously lately. But I love how these have turned out. They're kind of abstract, and still have a distinct flower in the middle there. Macro has the same kind of abstract too, but I think it's more like paint swooshing around being mixed and not yet fully blended together. A true swirling vortex. Next I thought I'd change up the city for street. I do feel like these look way better than city would have looked like, but they still have that kind of urban feel to them that I wanted to showcase. And in most of the images we again see the kind of Van Gogh-inspired style. I left in architecture as it was, although I still had just a single building in mind when I wanted to prompt this. But we get some really swirly staircases here. I do think they look beautiful, but also really chaotic. And here we see the interior images. They possibly don't go that well together with sci-fi, but for now this is the grouping I went with. The interiors too have some swirling staircases there. They look interesting, but again really chaotic to make real sense mostly. Sci-fi has more swirls than sci-fi, I guess. There are hints of sci-fi, but only if you look hard enough. Portraits have some female faces with some swirling stuff vortexing around the heads. Some of it is hair, some of it is some unknown substance. Fantasy has some cool effects from the swirls. And this time there is no portraits or women. Really strong vortexes. Next up is liqueur. Instrument used in analytical chemistry and environmental science, manufactured by Liqueur Incorporated. It was something recommended to me by the described feature and I liked what it produced. But this could also be kind of a showcase of the version 5.2 default style. I am not that good at recognizing it yet. This style was somewhat similar to the 5.1 default style, so it could very well be the case with 5.2 as well. But it seems to create some interesting images, mostly women with hair that is filled with some kinds of bubbles and wires and things. The landscapes look really interesting too. Kind of fantastic, a little bit surreal, very alien looking. Wildlife I don't really like. It really reminds me of the default 5.1 style a lot. A bunch of stuff crammed into one image. The flowers do have the kind of feel that just this word seemed to have. And really pretty flowers. Macro is really liking some mushrooms along with some really unrecognizable stuff. Street has a really maximalist feel to it. There are some elements present in here as well that I really disliked with city. But I guess in this case the abundance of electrical wires might mean more that these are anime-inspired Asian cities. There is some nice stuff in architecture images. Most are really busy again, but I really love the lower right one. It's like a sci-fi city where trees are hanging from the sides. There's some greenery present in some interior images as well. And I think it actually might be from the default style, those arched windows. They look awesome though. And sci-fi images too look great. We see some cities of the future or of alien planets. For portraits, the bubbles and wires have been toned down a bit, but we do see them in 3 of the images of this grid. And one is just a normal portrait. And fantasy has some great stuff there, really wonderful fantasy worlds. We see a mushroom theme recurring here as well, and the waterfalls that we saw in the landscape images. But overall I love these. And speaking of mushrooms, here we have mushroom head. Hairstyle resembling a mushroom cap, with shorter sides and a rounded top. But we get something very literal when prompting with Midjourney. We see actual mushrooms with heads and heads with mushrooms growing on top of them. Very weird and very wonderful. No actual heads in landscapes, but a lot of mushrooms. Wildlife seems to be incorporating the mushroom head with animal or creature faces. Really creepy, but I like how weird these are. Especially the top right one and the lower left one. Flower is kind of not present here. We have heads, we have mushrooms on top of heads, but very little flowers. Some of the stuff there is somewhat reminiscent of flowers. And macro has given eyes to the mushrooms, so the mushrooms are the heads. Kind of creepy, but funny. Streets have some mushrooms there. The lower right one is kind of interesting. Architecture has some great shapes due to the mushrooms, wonderful designs. And surprise surprise, interiors have a bunch of mushrooms growing inside. Not so good living environments, I would guess. And I love the sci-fi mushroom head aliens. Very creepy, strange, weird, and so cool that Midjourney has come up with these. Portraits and fantasy are both pretty tame compared to what we just saw. Just some women who have mushrooms growing on their heads. The portrait and fantasy images look so similar it's kind of hard to tell them apart. Now we dive into intricate underwater world. Complex ecosystem beneath the water's surface, teeming with diverse aquatic life. And we do get exactly that. Mostly something that I guess you would see at an aquarium. I have never been diving myself, so I don't know if the underwater environments look like this in actual oceans as well. One would think that in actuality they're a bit more spaced out and not this condensed. For landscape we seem to get some fantasy castles actually in some of the images. And wildlife is obviously depicting fish. Flowers and macro look actually pretty similar this time. Flowers are perhaps more looking like actual flowers which do not exist underwater, but macro looks like something that looks pretty realistic for a coral reef. For streets we get some submerged cities and fish crossing the street. The top right one doesn't actually look that underwater to me. Architecture is looking quite nice, kind of old-timey, and lots of arches and towers. Interiors look great too, kind of like submerged buildings where coral has started to grow on things. Sci-fi is nice, kind of some sci-fi elements there. Portraits seem to have ladies with coral as hair and fish swimming around in there. And this time fantasy does some nice underwater castles. It's strange how fantasy changes so much that sometimes it's so similar to portraits and at other times it can't be further away from it. And as the last word combination or style, we have a color combination. Dark white and blue. Color palette combining deep shades of blue with subdued or softer shades of white. And it's kind of a contradiction. How can you have dark white? But I guess Midjourney just adds a dash of darkness, dash of white and darker shades of blue. Landscapes look a lot different from what we've seen so far in here. Kind of desolate wintry views it would seem. The wildlife looks nice as well. I like this color combination. Not sure if animals like this actually exist, although they do remind some existing animals, but they just might be a mix of some animals we recognize, but don't actually look entirely like this. Very similar looks for flower and macro again it would seem, with the exception of the one bug in macro. Really pretty color combination for these flowers, again not sure if such combinations actually exist in nature. These streets look nice, kind of like alleys in smaller towns with cobblestone streets. And the architecture looks very modern and sleek, and what looks to be lots of concrete. The interiors look very sophisticated, very photorealistic, and actually not over the top, filled with all kinds of stuff. Sci-fi has some great views of alien planets and a lady in very futuristic plastic clothing that doesn't look comfortable to wear. And this time we seem to get faces again for portraits and fantasy. Portraits are more painted, and fantasy has some really white hair along with some flower decorations, I guess. Really pretty though. Alright, so that were the styles for this time. Hopefully I will have some more time to make some longer videos with lots and lots of stuff packed in them soon, but I have a feeling that quite many of you have liked these shorter videos that I've made lately. I will see how I will proceed in the future. I may just make a mix of these. I really hope you got some styles and looks to try out from these examples. Leave some comments if you found any of these useful in your prompting. And I always appreciate all likes I get as well. Oh, and if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to my channel for more videos like these. I think I just hit 8,000 subscribers, which is more than what I would have ever imagined, so thank you to every one of you. And also thank you for watching, and let's continue prompting.